Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Keep It Real. When you look at the statistics on the cultures and the societies that produce the greatest amount of centenarians, remember a centenarian is a person that lives over 100 years old. When you look at these cultures, you find some interesting things in their diet, some common threads in all these different cultures. And one of those things is nuts in their diet. Different types of nuts. And maybe the different types of nuts vary from culture or society to society, but it's a really common theme that you see in these groups of people that have very long-living citizens. And so I found that interesting, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about the nutrient content of some of these nuts. And so I want to talk about a nut that is kind of pushed aside, and it's usually the nut that's left over in a bowl of mixed nuts, and that's the Brazil nut. And so I looked at some interesting studies, and one study I'll share with you is a study that was published in a journal called Hospital Nutrition, and they looked at patients with dialysis. And patients with dialysis have a problem filtering blood in their kidneys, and if you can't filter blood in your kidneys, then you have to go and to this machine called a dialysis machine, and you have to have the blood filtered by the machine. But one of the really unfortunate and common side effects of having your blood filtered in this way is you get deficient in a really key mineral called selenium. Selenium is a very important mineral. We need only very small amounts of selenium, but it's extremely important to have those small amounts. And that's a little bit different from what we might call macro minerals like magnesium and calcium. We need hundreds of milligrams every day of these macro minerals, but the micro minerals, we only need micro amounts or micrograms. And so a couple hundred micrograms might do it for selenium, but with calcium, magnesium, you need hundreds of milligrams. So it's a lot more that you need of those. But they looked at these patients that go through dialysis. It's very common to have this low selenium. So they used food as medicine. They used Brazil nuts, because we know that Brazil nuts have about 50 micrograms of selenium. And when you have low selenium, you're going to have problems with your thyroid hormones. When your thyroid produces T4, or it's called thyroxine or T4, T4 then has to get converted to T3, and T3 is really the active thyroid hormone. And to do that conversion, you need this important mineral called selenium. And so people who go through dialysis usually have thyroid hormone problems and they have low selenium. So they gave each of the subjects one Brazil nut per day for 3 months. So they gave them about 50 micrograms, and they saw a significant improvement in their selenium levels. And along with the selenium levels going up, their thyroid hormones also improved. But the T3, I noticed, it didn't come up quite to the levels that we like it to. And frankly, 50 micrograms of selenium is a lot less than what we typically recommend. We'd usually either recommend 4 Brazil nuts per day for about 200 micrograms of selenium, or a person could just take a capsule with 400 micrograms of selenium. And I think they would have seen higher improvements. Although they saw improvement, they probably would have saw it a little bit better. So that was very interesting about Brazil nuts and thyroid hormones in these dialysis patients. And then another study that was published in Nutrition Journal, they looked at patients who have dyslipidemia, which is basically just a fancy term for high cholesterol, and they also had hypertension or high blood pressure. And what they did was they measured their, everybody's heard of cholesterol, and most of you have probably also heard of good and bad cholesterol. The good is HDL, or high density lipoproteins, and the quote unquote bad cholesterol is LDL, or low density lipoproteins. Now LDL is not inherently bad molecule. We need a certain amount is healthy, but here's where it becomes a problem. If LDL gets oxidized, that's when it becomes the bad guy. That's when it starts sticking to your blood vessels and clogging your circulation, and that could increase the risk of cardiovascular issues. So fortunately, we can measure a person's level of oxidized LDL. So the reason why in general we say high LDL is bad, because the greater the amount of LDL that's floating around, the greater the chance that some of that is going to get oxidized or get this type of damage to it. So the thing that decreases oxidized LDL is a molecule that your body makes called glutathione peroxidase. And glutathione peroxidase is the chemical in your body that keeps that damaged LDL in check and helps to repair it or help your body get rid of it and make it so it's not oxidized anymore. And one of the minerals that your body needs, it requires for production of this glutathione peroxidase is, you guessed it, selenium. So they gave these patients a form of Brazil nuts. They used Brazil nuts again in this study for their level of selenium, and this study was for several weeks, and they saw a significant improvement of their, not only their selenium levels, but they measured their glutathione peroxidase. That went up, and because their glutathione peroxidase went up, their oxidized LDL went down. So this is a very clear relationship that when this important antioxidant mineral called selenium goes up, the LDL cholesterol goes down. And that's a major home run to try and decrease our risk factor for cardiovascular issues like heart disease and strokes and that kind of thing. We want to keep that oxidized cholesterol, that oxidized LDL down. And so something as simple as a couple of Brazil nuts is all you need to really make that happen. So just to remind you, that is a Brazil nut. So stop leaving it in the bowl. Enjoy the Brazil nuts. Until next time, keep it real.